Is your belief system around change based on what you can control versus what you can't control? Or is it just when you're specifically wanting to change something, it then becomes hard or challenging? And what if it doesn't have to be? What if that could be something entirely different? Hey everybody, Jeff here. Before we get started, if you're getting value from the podcast, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For those of you listening on podcast apps, don't forget to rate and review. Your support really helps the show reach more people, and for that, I am truly grateful. Now let's dive in.
Welcome to The Point with Jeff Spikes, the show about achieving goals, embracing growth, and finding your true path. And now, here's your host, Jeff Spikes.
Hello and welcome to The Point. This is your host, Jeff Spikes, and what a joyful day this is. It's a joyful day when you get to really look in the mirror and decide what you believe about change. What do you believe about change? When I say change is, what do you think? You say change is so challenging and difficult. Do you say it's a pain in the, or is it a son of a? What is change when you say it? What do you think is driving your decision to say that's what change is? Are you the person who says, man, change is simple. Change is just a process. What do you think after hearing change is? There's a big consideration there there are things that just change and you don't even notice it. There's some things that change and you do. But what happens when you see change in hindsight? When you look back and say, wow, this is way different than it was before. And I don't even remember how it became so different. Right? Maybe it's because of practice, and what was challenging or difficult or frustrating at first, you now can look back on and go, wow, all this practice has really paid off. This is much easier. It's much better than it was. It's whatever, right? Put the adjectives that you want to on what your idea and what your consideration is. What happens inside of you, in your mind, in your body, when you consider what the framework is around change? And what happens when you begin to think about change that has naturally happened versus change that has seemed to happen without understanding how or why versus change that's really simple to understand? The seasons change. Is your belief system around change based on what you can control versus what you can't control? Or is it just when you're specifically wanting to change something, it then becomes hard or challenging? And what if it doesn't have to be? What if that could be something entirely different? It can, and it actually is. May not be for you today, but it actually is a process to move towards to where change becomes simpler and easier in all ways. Typically, what's really happening when you want to change something, and let's just consider three key elements of what we're talking about. Let's isolate this down into a really specific way. Change in that you want something to improve or grow. You want a better result. You want a better financial result. You want a better relational result, or you want a better judgmental, and I don't mean judgmental in the negative way, but you want a better benchmark for performance out of you and your family and your loved ones. So out of your company, so that's the finance part, right? So let's frame this down into three basic things that you want to change. An increase of finance, an increase of business, an improvement in your relationships, and whatever the third one that I said that I can't remember. An improvement in performance. So you want a better result in how something's turning out for you, whether it's a grade or whether it's a texture, whether it's whatever it is. you have something that you believe is improved, a performance of some kind. So if we just bring it into that framework, and so that we eliminate a lot of the other stuff, now we start looking at where there's more intention to either change or not change, where most of you have the common theme around the possibility of change being tough or difficult. And normally when it's difficult, it's because something in you doesn't really want to change. So the comments that we've been getting around this framework of change are all about what is the first step in change? Is it the decision that you make? Is that the first actual step in change? Is that the first action you take towards change? I guess that could depend on what you want. If you're working in just a way of not having much intention, then yeah, change happens the minute you decide to change. But there's something that happens in awareness that you might be missing if you're not considering it. And that is that there is a process of awareness that happens around the idea of contemplation. In the stages of change written by the Prochaskas, they really looked at the science of change, and they initially started studying this in the idea of trying to come up with a framework to help people stop with smoking cessation. They stop with nicotine, stop with cigarettes. So they're trying to impact how many people smoked and help people not smoke. And they started studying this. It was years ago, and they were looking at what those stages are. And the first stage of change in that framework is pre-contemplation. I haven't even considered that change could happen now. Or so you haven't even considered that a change needs to happen. So there's something that happens in your awareness that moves you from pre-contemplation to contemplation that all of a sudden says, okay, now I have a reason to change. Now I realize that there's something that could be different. I didn't know that this was bad for me. Now I know it's not working for me anymore. Or this was a strategy I was using. And we're going to pull away from the nicotine part of it and just go into basic change. There's many strategies you might use that were very effective and that all of a sudden stop working. In sports, athletes begin to understand, tennis, once you know the other person's serve, you know how to hit it back to them. And once they figure out how you're hitting it back to them, they realize I got to change their serve. Ping pong, tennis, those are the same way. So that's really a simple translation or a way of considering what that looks like in that arena. You may be doing something that was working really well until it didn't, and then you have to pick a new strategy. Now, oftentimes in life, you may find strategies, whether if you're trying to change the chemistry of your body to feel better, and it's what you're ingesting in your body, whether you're using alcohol or if it's the food you eat or the timing you eat or your caffeine intake or anything else, you might have a strategy that worked really well for the result you were trying to achieve. And then for whatever reason, your body changes in its tolerance or something else in it, that strategy stops working. There's many of these things that can start feeling shameful, like now I have a problem. And oftentimes it's that you were showing up in your best self with a really cool strategy that worked really well. And there's no shame in the fact that that stopped working. Learn from it and move on and pick something different if you can. Now all of a sudden you have something that you were doing that you realize isn't a good way to keep doing things, then you need to do something different. And that's where the contemplation stage comes in. Now you're beginning to think about what that change might look like, why you might want to change. You might try some really mindful and intentional behaviors to discover even why you're doing something the way you are. Well, so that's all part of walking through that behavioral way of thinking, right? And when you move out of contemplation, there's a point where you begin to plan. How am I planning? And some people say that's the most commonly missed part of the process of change. If you do break change down into a process, and now you might even be able to begin building evidence that change is difficult if it takes all these steps and there's all this process. And I'm saying the steps in the process could help in understanding how simple and easy it actually might be. Because now if you can keep it simple and build the awareness, know what you want, know what you don't want, learn to move closer towards what you do want, learn to be more motivated and encouraged by what you do want, always paying attention to what you don't want, always keeping your critical mind focused and give your critical mind a job to keep a watch out for the things you don't want. And what are those things that are the most debilitating that to watch out for the most? A few weeks ago, we talked about discouragement, doubt, and indecision. Give your unconscious mind a job of looking out for those three emotions, if those are your obstacles. Maybe some of your obstacles are more fear-oriented, that you're too cautious. Maybe you're overly cautious. Maybe it's paying attention to when you're taking too much risk and noticing those triggers. Whatever it is for you, you get to choose and decide. But that moving from to that point where all of a sudden there's the awareness you have and you want to drive change, maybe the stages of change actually show how simple it could be if you then break it down and then learn to automate the result you do want. Now, but what if when it comes into the idea of improving a relationship or increasing your finances, building a company? This is where we start talking about scaling. And you've heard me say before, if you've been watching this for a while, you've heard me say that these processes on a 50,000-mile view from the highest view are very similar regardless of where you are. Right? It's a very similar process and a concept of how to live in a way that accentuates and allows for the spirit of growth. Understanding that there can also always be a natural retracement. Moving out of that mindset of always having to juggle and something always falling to the floor and needing to resurrect something and make it entirely better because it fell apart, and moving into a place where everything is optimal and you're just allowing it to relax and retrace from optimal as you continue to increase what optimal looks like to you. How is change being difficult or easy different for you when you think of it in those two mindsets? Can you put yourself in the mindset of thinking about all the things you're juggling and whatever it is you're completely letting go of that you'll worry about later because you're so busy fixing something else? That is oftentimes evidence that you're working in a deficiency-based model where you're consistently trying to change what is deficient. And you're focused mostly on what is deficient, which then energetically is recreating and developing more deficiency. Versus shifting into a place where you're optimal and you're thinking about everything and how it works best. Therefore, you're creating more of what works best. Because what you focus on is what grows. So dealing with change and considering, is change difficult to you? I wrote some notes. I just want to double check myself because I will go on a tangent quickly and take you with me. And let's not do that today. What is different when something changes naturally and you end up seeing in hindsight? When you enter into a process that someone has created to improve relationships, you go to a counselor or a therapist or a class or a coach on how to improve your relationship. You go to church and walk through one of their classes on improving your marriage. You walk through that process, you'll oftentimes also look back. So plugging into a system or a process that's known to work can make change a lot simpler and easier. Doing something with a group, that's where masterminds and other things have come into play, can also help things go, where you end up looking in hindsight and saying, wow, it's really gotten better than what it was. Now, in a financial world of building a business and trying to increase the number of leads you have or increase the number of clients you have, increase your number of sales, now we're talking a little bit different level where you might look in hindsight and say, wow, we grew the business further than we thought we had, but you will know when you're increasing your business typically because it's an increase of workload, and you then need to increase other things with it. And when you don't have to, you have magic. When you don't have to, you have absolute magic. When you're able to grow a company and grow your sales and your revenue without growing your costs, what did it take to shift into that belief that that was even possible, especially as things became less labor driven? There are companies in the last 70 years. There's one company in particular, a friend of mine was managing the company, and there's books and processes that have come out of this where their costs were around 275 or 295 million were their costs, and they were making about 15 million a year. This mentor of mine ended up growing that company to over $1 billion in revenue without changing their costs. Their costs stayed in that high 200 million range of cost. And instead of having a profit of 15 million, their profit went up over $1 billion. That is an incredible story to think about. But we're not digging into that story or the name of the company or anything else, because if this is for you to consider, what happens when change is that you grow in the result you want without growing in the effort that it's taking to get there. That's what happens when you increase your capacity. When you increase your capacity, you work less for the same result, or you work the same or less for a greater result. And what are the things that you get to do that make it seem better and easier? Now, moving relationally is a great way to do that. But if you consider relationally what makes your relationship smoother and easier, when you're encouraging, you will move relationships forward much faster when you feel tension and discomfort. If you consider that your problem, your challenge, yours to settle or sort out, and not make that the person you're relating to's problem, you will notice a great increase in how your relationship with that other person grows, because you'll be taking accountability for your own framework of emotional well-being and the thoughts that you're having that are creating those feelings. And you'll have a better way of relating to that person. Now, that's walking forward in an assumption that everyone's doing the right thing. But even if it's not, you will have a different way of managing yourself when someone else isn't doing the right thing, where you don't take on their problems, nor do you try and give them yours. So you will have an immediate increase by taking that level of ownership. You'll have an immediate increase of ease and effortlessness in that relationship, that relationship naturally goes where it's meant to. Now, if that relationship is naturally meant to go into a place of increase, an increase of connection, an increase of pleasure, an increase of satisfaction, then it's a beautiful thing. And it can also be a beautiful thing if that relationship is then meant to be something different. There's many companies we would scale and many relationships that get stronger when you recognize the struggle that's happening, when you drop something that's less profitable, that doesn't have a very good rate of return. When you drop that and focus your energy towards what is working really well. You know, the whole story of someone that's trying to be the jack of all trades and realizes that, boy, I'd be much better off just focusing on the one thing I'm great at. And doing that, I then have a great acceleration. How much larger could their company be? How much more productive and profitable could they be? And do they become when they really focus on that one thing? Huge growth can happen there. So there's another consideration of how can change be simpler and easier. Now think for a minute about what's happening for you when you've experienced change that has been simple. Think of something that's worked for you and how that was so easy, and think about what you were doing. Now, the key to all of this is that when you move out of, let's go back to the stage of change for you really quickly and go through, in the planning stage, you plan what you want to do and plan the outcome of what you want. And then you begin to take action. And there can oftentimes be a time when there's that retracement and something comes back and we don't get the change. Now, we're keeping this to these three key areas of looking for growth and improvement in finance, relationship, or performance. So we stay out of some of those other areas that it can be a different conversation. But we're just, for the point of this conversation, we're going to stick in this framework, honoring that commitment I made. When you're working in that level of performance, an increase of performance, an increase of relationship, or an increase of finance, what actions are you taking? And when something retraces, when you notice something, what happens for you? That can be another pivot point where change and the belief systems around what change is. If you're believing that change is difficult and challenging and hard, that can actually be another pivot point where it can drag you down further versus propelling you forward. If you have a belief system and understanding and know that revisiting an emotion, revisiting a result you don't want, can oftentimes just anchor the new behaviors or the new ways of thinking or the new ways of being that are driving the better result, especially if you give yourself the grace and understanding of knowing that revisiting that had a purpose. But if you're coming from a deficiency based model, this is one of the key elements around having a strengths based ideation of thinking forward with your best self and how to move forward in how you're naturally wired and honoring that in yourself and others. You'll hear it said oftentimes on right here on the show, and if you're working in designing strengths, you'll see that you are better than 1 in a million, more than 1 in a million, naturally unique, beautiful, innately wonderful in you as a person, just like everyone else. So both are true. It's not a full split of extreme of where you're either unique and incredibly unique and all on your own, which that makes you too egoistic and all these other things, or you're just like everyone else. We move out of that and say, no, I'm just like everyone else, in that I have very unique, special ways of moving forward towards the right idea, towards the best idea. And when we all recognize and acknowledge our different perspectives, our different viewpoints, our different experiences, and our ways of moving forward towards achieving a goal, when we all honor and acknowledge we're better for it, things are easier, especially when we're all moving towards the same place, we find that we're all in different lanes. That should we all stay in those lanes of our strengths, of your strengths, the effortlessness is there. It becomes viscerally honest and real. To challenge you to test that moving forward and really notice how someone else can accomplish the same thing as you in such a different way, and how much more can be accomplished in the bigger picture with both of you moving forward in your different ways, with all the people that can be reached and touched along the way to make something better. Now, that can be both a business way of moving forward and having increase and creating the change you want, and relational. It can be both, and performance. The person who broke the 4-minute mile had all kinds of people right behind him breaking the 4-minute mile. When you break a milestone, all of a sudden everyone else can break that barrier. So this is another way that change can all of a sudden be easy. So this is the challenge for today for you, is to sit down and really consider, or go for a walk and really consider and think about. If you're driving down the road, put on music or turn it off, but consider, what do you believe and what do you think about change? What's creating that belief, and what if it were different? And if you already believe that change is simple, change is possible, change is easy, and what makes it difficult is you. What makes it difficult is how you believe and how you think. And this is not to discount or diminish or invalidate anyone that's going through a change that is difficult or challenging, because something has happened that is grief-ridden and traumatic and terror and affecting you in a way. But should we go down the road of start talking about those things, there's also a way to consider the natural, healthy emotional response that we have to things, and allowing that, and how judgment attached to that can make a big difference in how that works. But then it's not about hard or easy. Then it's about allowing a natural expression of life, allowing a natural expression of self, which doesn't always feel hard. So the final consideration here is that of this podcast, of what you're getting to consider and hear today, is that what happens when you've considered change being difficult because of the emotional attachments to it, or because of something that's happened that has affected you negatively and made you less resourceful emotionally, and that for you feels very difficult and challenging. Take a deep breath and feel respected, acknowledged, and validated in that sometimes that's how we feel. That sometimes I have felt that. You feel that way. Everyone has these feelings. But if you've attached that to then what you think about change, you might stay there a lot longer than otherwise. So take a handout from me. Take a handout from other people in my community, meaning a helping hand, a friendly hand, a warm embrace, a hug, a uplift, to know that if we detach your belief around how difficult it could be and just acknowledge who you are and what you're feeling and help you through that, that's where community comes into play. You can be there as long as you need to be there to learn what you need to learn and move forward. We have clients that are grief counselors and help people through trauma and change and other types of really challenging, emotionally challenging opportunities. And one of the things that you'll hear talked about consistently is that when something happens, there's a message or a lesson that you can move from it that helps you move forward more powerfully. And there's also a portion you want to drop and shed and let come off because it wasn't your problem to begin with, or because that's the part you don't need to carry forward. And one of the keys to carrying forward, to moving forward, is taking that beauty out of it and moving forward and allowing yourself the space to have a natural emotional response. But that's more about how we're judging ourselves and how you're judging yourself or how you're judging others. And that's another topic for another podcast. So back on the note of how to move forward and take the time to consider what your beliefs are and what your thoughts are and what would happen for you if you had a different belief that change is actually simple, systematic, easy, effortless, and that you could take the actions that would help you look back in hindsight a few months from now and say, wow, everything's changed and everything's so much better, and all the results that I was looking for are right here, right now, or clearly in my future. That is the point today. Peace out to all. Love to all. And wrap your arms around someone you love and be grateful for them today. Show them that you're grateful for them today. And if you were touched today, if anything touched you in a way that had you thinking about anything, get a hug. Because together we get through all the things in life that need to get through. And join me in making the flow of life a little bit simpler and easier.
With Jeff Spikes.
Peace out.
The show about achieving goals.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of The Point with me, Jeff Spikes. Please visit jeffspikes.com for everything you would need to know to engage with me offline. And lastly, thank you for your time, your attention, and your consideration. This is The Point.